Let me start with a little background. I'm a 12-year-old girl living in a quiet, peaceful estate in Ireland. It's the kind of place where nothing much happens. At least, that's what I thought. My mom plays a part in this story too, though it mainly involves me. It was midnight, just as Christmas Day had begun. The house was silent, the kind of calm you expect on a special night like this. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Not a light, friendly knock. A deliberate, echoing sound that carried through the stillness of the night. I froze, my parents' warnings ringing in my ears. Never open the door to strangers, especially late at night. I didn't even go near it, instead hoping whoever it was would just go away. 3 minutes passed, and then came another knock. This time, it wasn't a knock at all. It was a loud, heavy bang, as if someone was trying to force their way in. My stomach dropped, and a wave of panic washed over me. Not knowing what else to do, I ran to wake my mom. When she answered the door, there stood a man. He was clearly drunk, with a disheveled beard and a white hoodie that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. He reeked of alcohol, swaying slightly as he stood. "Can I walk your dog? I've got my dog with me, so she'll be fine," he slurred. From where I stood, a few steps behind my mom, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The question was bizarre, and my mom clearly thought so too. She politely but firmly told him no, but he didn't leave right away. He stood there, mumbling something incoherent, as my mom kept insisting that he go. When he finally turned to leave, my mom closed the door quickly. Neither of us said much. She looked shaken, but we both tried to brush it off as just a weird, random encounter. The next morning, though, the unease came flooding back. I was sitting at the table, eating breakfast, when my mom started talking to my dad about the incident. I wasn't supposed to hear, but curiosity got the better of me. I slipped one of my headphones off and quietly listened. "I was really scared last night," my mom admitted. "That's the same guy who hides in the bushes when I walk Molly." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart sank so low, it felt like it was scraping the floor. I hadn't realized the man wasn't just some random drunk. He'd been lurking, watching us, watching her. I hoped that would be the end of it. Surely, it was just a strange, isolated event. But life doesn't always work like that. Fast forward 3 years. I'm 15 now. It's a quiet evening, and I'm home alone, sitting in my room watching TV. Everything feels normal, but out of nowhere I get this weird feeling, like someone's eyes are on me. I glance toward the window, and my blood runs cold. Standing in our empty driveway, staring directly at my bedroom window, is the same man. His hoodie is different, gray this time, but there's no mistaking him. He's just standing there, unmoving, with that same vacant look. My stomach churns, and my hands start to shake. Without thinking, I jump up and yank the curtain shut. My heart is pounding so loudly, it drowns out every other sound. I stand there for what feels like an eternity, unsure of what to do next. My phone is downstairs, but the idea of going to get it feels impossible. I peek through a tiny gap in the curtains, praying he's gone. But he isn't. He's still standing there, staring, as though he's waiting for something. Terrified, I lock my bedroom door and sit on my bed, hugging my knees to my chest. I stay like that until I finally muster the courage to go downstairs and grab my phone. By the time I get back upstairs, he's gone. But the fear doesn't leave. It stays with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind, making me question every shadow, every sound. I can't shake the feeling that he'll come back. And as it turned out, my fears weren't misplaced. Not even 10 seconds had passed when a thunderous bang echoed through the house. It came from the front door, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone jiggling the handle. My heart stopped. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move as adrenaline coursed through me. Then the noise stopped, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe he had left. But that hope shattered, literally, when I heard the sound of breaking glass. The sharp, violent crash sent chills down my spine. He'd broken a window and was climbing inside. Panic took over. My legs moved before my brain could process it, and I bolted to the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and locking it with trembling hands. My phone was clutched so tightly in my grip that it hurt. The house fell eerily quiet, save for the rapid pounding of my heart. But the silence didn't last long. I heard heavy, fast footsteps pounding up the stairs. Each one seemed louder than the last. He was coming. My bedroom door creaked open, and then there was a pause. When he didn't find me there, he moved straight for the bathroom. The handle rattled violently, and then came the kicks, each one more forceful than the last. "You can't hide from me!" he bellowed, his voice filled with rage. "I'm going to rape you and kill you!" My entire body shook uncontrollably. I was hyperventilating, barely able to hold my phone steady as I dialed 999. The operator answered, but my voice was barely a whisper as I choked out my address and begged for help. "Officers are on their way," the calm voice on the other end reassured me, but it didn't feel like help could come fast enough. The kicks kept coming, each one making the flimsy bathroom door groan under the strain. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. It felt like the next one would be the one to break it down. Tears streamed down my face as I braced myself for the inevitable. Then, salvation. "Put your hands up! Do it now!" The commanding voice of an officer boomed through the house, followed by the sound of a scuffle and shouting. Relief washed over me, but I was still frozen in place. I couldn't bring myself to unlock the door. My body was numb, and my mind was stuck in the moments before. It took nearly 30 minutes before I found the courage to open the door. When I finally stepped out, I was met by an officer with a kind but concerned expression. He guided me downstairs, where I saw the man being hauled out in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage. He had a backpack, one of the officers explained. Inside, we found... He hesitated before continuing, as if unsure how much I could handle. A rope, condoms, a gag, dildos, bleach, and a meat cleaver. My stomach turned. I felt like I might throw up. The officer's words echoed in my mind, the weight of what could have happened settling over me like a suffocating blanket. If we had been just 5 minutes later, the officer started, but he didn't need to finish. I already knew. 5 minutes later, the door would have been down, and I don't even want to imagine what would have happened next. That night changed everything for me. My sense of safety, my trust in the quietness of my neighborhood, it was all shattered. Even now, years later, the sound of heavy footsteps or the crash of breaking glass sends me spiraling back to that night. It was the most horrifying experience of my life, one that I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I'm grateful. Grateful for the officers who came when they did, and for the instincts that pushed me to run and lock that door. If not for those, I might not be here to tell this story. This happened in 2016, just a week before Christmas. Most of it is still crystal clear in my mind, though a few details feel a little hazy after all these years. On that particular day, my mom decided to take me shopping for some last-minute Christmas gifts and holiday deals. Before we left, I grabbed my trusty black leather Fossil backpack. It was well worn, but sturdy, and I used it for everything. That day, it carried my planner, a journal, my wallet, and my DS case. I'd gone to a gaming party the night before and hadn't bothered to take it out. Honestly, I always kept it on me anyway. Animal Crossing and Pokemon battles were my go-to for killing time, and I liked having it just in case. We spent the day making our way through the mall, ticking items off our list. Halfway through our shopping spree, I got a text from an old high school bandmate. I'd been a proud band nerd, and my percussion section was practically family. The text said a bunch of us were planning a spur-of-the-moment movie night, and they wanted me to come, and my mom too. She was one of those cool, well-loved band parents, so everyone was happy for her to join. We finished our errands, then headed to the theater. The night was great. We laughed, caught up, took a ton of silly photos. It felt good to reconnect. We got home around 9:30 p.m., both in high spirits. As we pulled into the driveway, my mom asked me to grab the shopping bags from the trunk. I was listening to music on my phone as I got out, slinging my backpack over one shoulder. I walked around to the back of the car and stood waiting for her to pop the trunk. That's when I noticed the SUV. It came out of nowhere, whipping onto the swale right in front of our house. At first, I didn't think much of it. My bandmates were notorious for their pranks, so my initial thought was that someone had followed me home as a joke. Smirking, I turned, ready to greet whoever had pulled this ridiculous stunt. But when I turned, I wasn't met with a laughing friend. Instead, I found myself face to face with the barrel of a revolver. The man holding it was shorter than my 5'7", and had dark skin, an unkempt beard, and wild, curly hair. My gaze darted to his face, and a cold realization hit me. This wasn't a joke. This was real. "Give me money!" he shouted, his voice sharp and demanding. For a moment, I froze. Fear gripped me, but so did disbelief. My mind raced. What if the gun isn't loaded? Then, do I really want to find out? Finally, stay calm. Keep him in your sight. Give him what he wants. Just then, my mom rounded the back of the car, oblivious to the situation. She must have heard the man shout because she yelped when she saw me standing there, a gun pointed at my head. Later, she told me she thought it might have been some awful joke and was ready to give the prankster a piece of her mind. Her yelp startled the gunman. His eyes snapped to her, and without hesitation, he ran toward her. My mom bolted, fear now palpable in her movements. That's when my fear surged to a new level. If the gun was loaded, if he was desperate enough, I couldn't bear the thought of him hurting her. I panicked and yelled, "Just give him your fucking purse!" My mom stopped, pulled off her purse, and threw it at him. But instead of leaving, she started pleading. "Can I at least take my house keys and car keys out first? Please?" My stomach churned. I was terrified that her hesitation, her insistence, would push him over the edge. I turned toward her, yelling, "Shut up!" My voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it before. But the gunman didn't seem to care about her keys, or her for that matter. His attention shifted back to me. He stormed back toward me, the revolver still in his hand, shouting once again, "Give me money!" My heart was racing, but I managed to keep my hands steady as I shrugged my backpack off my shoulder. Before I could fully hand it over, he snatched it from me like a hawk grabbing its prey. That's when I glanced toward the car and noticed a second figure, taller, broader, and just as shadowed by the dim light. He stood by the driver's side door, watching silently. Despite the faint glow of the street lamp, his face was impossible to make out, adding an extra layer of unease. By now, my mom had retreated toward our garage, leaving me to face the gunman alone. He seemed satisfied with the backpack and started heading back to the SUV. I stayed frozen, unwilling to move or even breathe too loudly until they sped off. But just as I thought it was over, he turned back. His sharp eyes had caught the faint glow of my phone in my hand, pressed tightly against my chest in a feeble attempt to hide it. "Give me that!" he barked, rushing at me. I flinched as he ripped the phone from my grip and bolted back to the car. Within moments, both men were inside, and the SUV peeled out, tires screeching as they disappeared into the night. The entire encounter couldn't have lasted more than 45 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. As the taillights vanished around the corner, my body finally unfroze. I practically power-walked to the garage, shutting the door behind me with trembling hands. My mom, realizing I hadn't been right behind her, rushed over, still shaken but trying to mask her panic. She was already attempting to dial 911 on our landline, her hands fumbling over the buttons. But the line was dead. My stomach dropped. A wave of terror, unlike anything I'd felt during the robbery, washed over me. I'd had recurring nightmares, where in moments of life or death urgency, I couldn't call for help because the phone wouldn't work. To have that dream-like fear materialize in real life was more chilling than the gun itself. I took the phone from her, trying to steady my own shaky hands, and after a few frantic attempts, the line finally connected. The operator's calm voice was a stark contrast to the chaos we felt. Within minutes, flashing lights and sirens illuminated our quiet street. Cop cars and even an ambulance swarmed the block, shattering the silence of our neighborhood. The officers questioned me extensively, since I had gotten the clearest look at the gunman. As they pressed for details, I busied myself canceling my cards and reflecting on what had just happened. That's when it hit me. The DS. My heart sank. The only genuinely valuable items they'd taken, aside from our purses, were in that stupid case. 20 Pokemon games, countless hours poured into training and collecting, and my prized, hacked Animal Crossing village, all gone. I know it sounds trivial, but in that moment, the loss of my digital treasures felt like salt in an already gaping wound. Then came the trip to the police station for a sketch. 2 painstakingly long hours of trying to recall every detail of the gunman's face while sitting there with absolutely nothing to occupy myself. No journal, no DS, no phone. Just me, my thoughts, and the ridiculousness of the situation. News of the robbery spread like wildfire. It was the first incident of its kind in over a decade in our neighborhood, and the media was all over it. Unfortunately, one local news station decided to broadcast our exact address, effectively painting a target on our home. My mom had to make multiple calls to get them to take it down. It was as if we were being victimized all over again. A few months later, the same men struck again just a few houses down. This time, they ambushed a woman in her garage, forcing her inside while her young kids slept upstairs. They ransacked the place, making off with jewelry and other valuables. The woman later told police that the shorter one had worn a bandana over his face during the robbery. After that, we heard nothing else from law enforcement. As far as I know, they've never been caught. Looking back, the whole ordeal feels more surreal than anything. I've learned to laugh at the absurdity of it. Telling people about having my DS stolen at gunpoint never fails to get a chuckle, and I've leaned into the humor of it myself. Even the fiasco with the news station plastering our address has become a running joke among my friends. Still, I can't help but feel a pang of sadness whenever I think about my lost Pokemon and Animal Crossing village. As for the phone issue, that momentary, nightmare-fueled terror subsided quickly. It hasn't haunted me since. The whole thing remains a strange mix of fear, loss, and unexpected humor. One Christmas memory I'll never forget. This happened 10 years ago when I was 6 years old. I'm 16 now, female. And while I've grown up since that day, the memory of what happened still lingers in my mind as vividly as ever. It was a regular afternoon, and my mom had taken me along for some quick errands. We stopped at a small strip mall where she needed to grab something from one of the shops. Since she wouldn't be long and I wasn't in the mood to go inside, she decided to leave me in the car. The air conditioning had done its job, and I wasn't hot. So she locked the car, cracked the windows slightly, and left me with Bear, our German Shepherd Australian cattle dog mix. Bear wasn't just any dog. She was my best friend, my protector, and my playmate. When I was younger, she had been my ride, a furry, four-legged horse for a little girl's games, and my cuddly pillow when it was time to nap. By then, she was 6 years old herself, a mature but still incredibly loving dog. She was lying across my lap, snoozing peacefully as I played with my hands, humming softly to myself. That peace didn't last. Without warning, Bear's ears perked up and her body stiffened. She sat up straight, her eyes locked on something outside the car. I followed her gaze and realized, with a shiver running down my spine, that there was a man standing near the car. He wasn't just passing by, he was lingering. The windows were cracked just enough to let some air in, and now I realized they were also cracked enough for him to reach inside. Before I could react, he slid his hand through the opening, his fingers fumbling toward the lock. I froze, unsure of what to do. My small body felt paralyzed, a cold fear spreading through me. Our car had tinted windows, so I initially hoped he couldn't see me, but my hopes were dashed as he turned his head and locked eyes with me. I'll never forget the look on his face, a mix of surprise and determination. My heart raced, but I couldn't make a sound. What he didn't see, though, was Bear. In his desperation to unlock the door, the man hadn't noticed the furry 50-pound guardian lying just below the line of sight. As soon as he reached further inside, Bear sprang into action. She launched herself at the window, jaws snapping with a ferocity I'd never seen before. Her teeth clamped down hard on his hand, and the scream he let out was enough to send chills down my spine. The man yanked his hand back, but Bear wasn't letting go without a fight. She growled low and deep, her body pressed against the window, ready to lunge again if he tried anything else. I could see blood on his hand and the way his fingers bent unnaturally. Bear had likely broken a few. The man stumbled backward, clutching his injured hand, his face a mask of pain and panic. Without another glance at me or Bear, he turned and bolted, disappearing into the parking lot. I sat there, trembling, tears streaming down my face as I held on to Bear, who had returned to my lap, still growling softly. Her fur was bristled, and her eyes stayed fixed on the spot where the man had stood. It felt like hours before my mom finally returned, though in reality, it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. The moment she opened the door, I burst into tears and told her everything. Her face went pale as she listened, her eyes darting around the parking lot to see if the man was still nearby. She immediately called the police, who arrived shortly after. While we waited, she hugged me tightly and praised Bear for being such a brave, protective girl. Bear, ever the sweetheart, wagged her tail as if nothing had happened, licking my face to comfort me. The police took a report and checked the area, but the man was long gone. They said Bear's quick reaction likely saved me from something far worse. To this day, I don't like to think about what might have happened if she hadn't been there. Bear remained my hero, my protector, and my best friend until she passed away when I was 12. Even now, I can't think of her without feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for what she did that day. She wasn't just a dog. She was my guardian angel, and she proved it in a way I'll never forget.